If you're just running away, always remember you're taking all your stuff with you. So you better be sure that yourself is going to be up for whatever challenge you're going to set before it. Adults around me spoke of going off the rails. But I think that even at that age, I had an awareness that, well, why go on one particular set of rails? Is everybody else going in the direction I want to go in? There was always a question in my mind. Maybe I didn't want to travel in the same direction as the people on the rails. When I was 11 going on 12, and it was a Latin lesson, beautiful sunny day, and I really didn't like the idea of having to spend so much of my time in regimented sections, classes, break time, lunch time, homework time, piano lesson time. Why? And it was just a lovely sunny day, and my urge was to walk out over a field I could see from the window. So I did it. What I had in mind was a view of the sun through leaves. And I'd been to a place where I could see that on the coast. I also wanted to be by water. Basically, I hitchhiked to a coastal town called Littlehampton. I continued to run away from all schools I was sent to and never returned to conventional education. And eventually, my parents gave up on trying to get me to stay. They tried other options like tutoring and that sort of thing. But really, I'd given up on the idea of having to fit into this mould that I'd never asked to be poured into, particularly. I was sent for child guidance and made to interpret Rorschach blobs and this sort of thing, whereas nobody actually said, well, what's going on in the background here? You know, why doesn't she want to fit in? I think I can look at the fact that I'd had an example already of how a person can change their life. Instead of saying, Lucy left school because her mum and dad divorced, we could say, Lucy left school because she saw it was possible. Dad had left home to do something else that he wanted to do. So I had this can-do example in front of me. You can look at it any way you like. I'd had an awful lot of interesting jobs. I'd been not only a monkey keeper, but a stonemason's mate. I'd been a concierge in a very remote cottage in France. I was working for the Inland Revenue as a clerk, and I would be the sort of the pure conventional little tax clerk during the day, and then a nightclub hostess afterwards. And that way I was able to quite put away a little bit of money towards a big travel adventure that I wanted. But I didn't know what that travel adventure looked like. And I was filling my lunch hour with going to the library and looking for my next travel venture. And that is when I read the advert that my later arranged marriage husband put in a London magazine. It's a writer seeks wife, quotes, for year on tropical island. And it sounded, yeah, that would do it. That would fit the bill. The experience I had during that 14 months, it was just over a year, on a small island, has stayed with me ever since. Every single decision that I've made since then has somehow been informed by that experience. When I look back on the situation when we first landed on the island, and I realized that we had no way of contacting anybody from there because we'd lost our two-way radio. To be honest, I don't think I gave it much thought. We were there and we were going to see how we'd manage. The story I told myself then was that I was looking for a major personal challenge. That was a really good one-liner. But actually, I just wanted something very different and simple. I wanted a horizon to look at. In the particular culture I was brought up in, there's a huge variety of choice, far too much, in my view. So if I had an idea, it was of simplicity. So I had everything, in a sense, to gain from being on the island and nothing to feel. I didn't feel I was really giving up anything. I was getting something that I liked, and that was this one simple horizon. It was the extreme version of the best sunny days you can think of, not having to worry about clothes or image or any social concerns at all. Every time you put on a piece of clothing, you are putting on a persona. Every time you interact with somebody, you are also putting on a persona. When you're completely alone, without any cultural laws and mores around you, I'm getting perilously close to the cliche of saying finding yourself. And I don't want to say that because I don't believe that's what happened. I probably found one of my 19 or so selves there, and it was the survival one. There was an absolute loss of sense of structured time, except for the way it was structured by nature. I learnt how the tide moved between the rocks, when the fish would be in that particular place, when it was a good time of the moon to fish at night. I liked having only one clock, and that was the sun, and waking to it, getting up when it felt right. I liked all those things. But, you know, nature is quite a hard taskmaster. If you don't go fishing when the tide is right, you don't eat. It didn't really enter a completely different world until I'd lived on the island for some time. And I think probably a lot of the time, my love, my passion for the island came because I was high from semi-starvation. And when we were found and rescued by the natives, those people saved our lives, quite by chance. By passing one day when I was fishing on a rock, he was very poorly in camp, and they were astounded to find me there. And they realized pretty quickly what the situation was. They knew that I needed water and food. They could see how rake thin I was. And then the world from which I'd come from seemed very strange. What was normal there seemed like something concocted. And it distanced me, drew me even further back than I already was. When I was asked to write a book about it, I wrote exactly what I felt had happened, and was enormously surprised by the popularity of the book. Confusion came on in force, because if you become well known for doing something extraordinary, people like you because they like what you've done, or they're interested in what you've done. I had fans, lots of letters from people who said they could identify with me, and I've always wanted to do that. You have lived my dream, and I would think, actually, I've lived my life. But it put me in a strangely lonely position, and I think that probably applies to a lot of people who are quite well known for something. I was flown to many different places of the world. 7 weeks in the United States, big author tour, big expensive hotels and things. More food on one plate than I'd have eaten in a week. That was far more madness to me than the living on the island. My first son was the result of loneliness during an author tour in South Africa. I make no bones about that. I didn't have a special intimate relationship. I was just looking for a pair of arms for some comfort on this mad adventure where there was endless amounts of champagne, any amount of lobster you could eat, but nothing felt real to me. I returned from a big author tour to Scotland, expecting a baby. And so then there was a need to have a home, not to be itinerant anymore. And that gave me a focus. And within several years, 2 more little boys joined this family. I made attempts from time to time to fit in, a lot for the sake of my children, to wear the right clothes, to be accepted into a certain milieu. It always felt like a terrible strain, having to act, in a way, a prescribed part. I usually managed to say all the right things, but it was like writing a character. And I felt that I was just waiting out these years while my children completed their conventional education, almost waiting to start my own life again. It sounds pretty selfish. It is, but I did wait it out. But I was probably more unhappy than I've ever been during those years. And I thought the minute this mission for the children to finish their school is completed, I must get away. I went off for a trip for 8 days from Scotland to Bulgaria. Looked at 13 properties on the internet and chose this area because it was the quietest. And there was an old dog in an outhouse who I thought I could be friendly with. So, March, I viewed the place, chose it. June, we were here. It was really, and I began to feel my energy reviving, returning to that pleasure of picking fruit, just like under the wongai tree on Tuin, picking cherries from my own tree. It felt wonderful. And when my son learned of this, he saw an instant answer. We'll get Mum a yurt. Let's go. I feel quite more relaxed socially here in rural Bulgaria because I interact with 2 different communities in pretty set ways, and I'm not intimate with anybody at all. I have people I get on very well with here and that I like very much, but none of the burdens of friendship. Maybe I'm actually quite lazy emotionally. And I've been a lot happier going finding, if you like, that island self again, that just deals with what's important, survival aspect of everyday living, helping little lives like the kittens that I rescue. I think however I try to analyse why I've ended up so relatively contented in a yurt in a field in Bulgaria, I think it's got an awful lot to do with the fact that I am really a very solitary type. You can live in all sorts of different ways, but sometimes ideas get entrenched and it seems like there's only one way to live. And that's going to school and having a career. I don't really know why lots more people don't live differently. And yet, at the same time, I do understand it's about security and it's about sense of belonging, and there's nothing wrong with those things. I mean, there are patterns in most ways of life, and I've just never been satisfied that I've found a particular pattern that is mine, that involves other people. You could put it so simply, but it's very cliched, and it doesn't actually describe it well. To say, I don't feel that I belong, it's also a bit sad. And I'm so happy most of the time, it doesn't seem right to say it.